Oh, oh. Had our first crash.
Oh, will we?
Welcome back to the channel. So today we got a new thing, some new stuff for racing, this time on the SV650. As that project nears its end, there's just a few cool little things that I'm starting to put on the bike. Ordered it a little while ago, so we're doing a bit of endurance racing, as you'll have seen from some of the previous videos. And with the SVs, it's a bit difficult to do rear wheel changes. So we did the usual thing of drilling holes in the stock caliper bracket, putting your 2 loops of lock wire, being able to put the cable tie around the swing arm that holds the stock caliper bracket kind of in place on the swing arm, as well as doing the drilling and lock wiring the swing arm and the axle adjusters for your axle length in the swing arm, as well as putting the spring in between the axle holder that's in the swing arm and that adjusting plate, or the backing plate. That's something that we learnt from Sam from LWT Racing over on his YouTube channel. He's got a instructions video on that, so if you want to pop over to there, we'll drop a link in the description below so that you can have a look at that. It is a fairly simple, inexpensive fix, just costs a couple of springs that you need to cut to the correct length, some safety wire or lock wire, and a couple of big cable ties in order to hold it all together. Now, it does work pretty well. It means you can change a wheel fairly quickly, but it still does get a little bit fiddly. The caliper is mounted above the brake disc. It doesn't quite move. It doesn't stick in place like you would want. And there is a few companies that do an underslung caliper bracket that mounts Brembo or whatever upside down caliper, which makes it easier. All the endurance teams do that in the States and internationally as well. And you'll have the captive caliper on that bracket. I've been looking at that. There hasn't really been anything available until I saw one of the local American race teams, Wrecking Crew Racing. They had been in contact with L74 track and race products in the UK, who makes a plethora of kits, fast wheel change kits for all manner of bikes, but they didn't have anything for the SV. That team, they were running the SV in America, and they got in contact with L74 asking, can you make one? So L74 got a bike, put all the bits together, sent it out to the States, and they tested it. Now, I saw them post that on Facebook, and I started messaging them and was saying, oh, what does it take to get one of these? And they said, well, we're testing it for them on a race meeting, a race weekend. Once they get the ticket of approval, they'll be up for sale. And they have a couple of spare sets. So I was like, look, if you're willing to sell one, I need one before Phillip Island. And they were like, sweet, yep. So we got that all together, got that all planned. So we had it arrive today, and it's some pretty cool looking kit. So this part replaces the stock axle adjusting block that's in the right-hand side of the swing arm. And you'll notice we have the axle nut is actually captive to this block. So these 2 bolts will hold the axle nut onto this plate. So to put this in, you'll need to disconnect it, move all this out, throw it in, reconnect these. And then the axle block, the axle nut, stays to the swing arm so you don't have it dropping around on the floor. Now, I have a nice lightweight one on my bike. It was damaged in the crash from the last round. This is much tighter and needed to the bike, and it stays in place. It's captive, which is awesome. You'll also see this block here. These replace the standard end pieces, which can get a bit of play in them, can be a bit of a pain. You can see we've lock wired them on this. This one replaces it with a much sturdier material, and this bolt here, which goes through the drain plug in the bottom of the swing arm, which actually locks this into the swing arm, and then it's a captive system here. This bolt, the end, there's a nut with a spring washer in here, which is actually welded into the base of this plate. So everything stays like it's a proper engineered piece on this side. So that's one of the pieces. Now we have a second adjuster piece. This one will just feed into the standard plate on the left-hand side of the swing arm, which means it's not going to fall out. So this replaces the need to have the spring, which I have in the stock setup. It should be way easier to adjust. Then we have this, the beautiful caliper bracket, which mounts the caliper under the swing arm. As you can see, lovely piece of machined aluminium, or aluminum if you're American. The caliper bracket will slide onto this section here, which will actually be poking out of the swing arm, which the axle goes through with your captive axle nut. Once you've got it all located, grub screws will pinch this unit to the axle nut, which goes through this whole bracket here. That way this section will be permanently in place. You can see it's got the cutout here for the tab on the swing arm, so that when you're doing a wheel change, all of this stays in position in the swing arm. That way the wheel will just roll back in and it should be pretty easy to go. Now you're going to have a caliper mounted to the bottom of the kit. You can see you've got the two mount bolts there, or mount bolt holes there, and it fits a Brembo caliper. Having watched all of Sam's stuff on LWT, we saw him get one of these nice Brombos, as everyone's affectionately calling it. It's also got a pretty cool setup here with this pin and the way it has this spring function here, which actually holds the brake pads apart, if you can see that there, which will actually come in really handy when it's mounted upside down. And the final piece of the puzzle is this beautiful quick change axle. So you can see the cutout here, which is where the solid axle nut, the captive axle nut, which actually runs through the whole swing arm, this slots into there. And then you've got the lovely endurance style cup on the end of the axle. So this actually helps you locate if you're using a rotor gun or a fast tool. Helps you locate onto the nut, that way you're not going to strip it, damage the head of the nut, and allows you to reef the whole thing out of the swing arm nice and quick. So same exact style as World Endurance, the Ironman TT, all those fancy boys. And it's pretty cool that it's going to be on our little SV650. Okie dokie. So we've just put that whole kit in, played around with it a little bit. All up, that took about 20 minutes. That was with the wheel already having been out. So that was changing all the plates over, fitting it all up, putting the wheel in one time, putting the axle through, getting the chain tension set, and then making sure all these fasteners were done up, putting the caliper on. Now, I don't have the brake line for it yet, but good trial now to see how it all goes together. And I'm actually really stoked with it. It's a really cool piece of kit, and it's going to make life easier, especially when we start using an impact gun on the axle to get it on and off. So just quickly, we'll splice a bit of footage in here. I put the wheel in, tensioned everything up, took it out, put it back in to trial to see how quickly it goes. And then put the timer on, took the wheel out, put the wheel back in, all by hand, so without a rotor gun. And you'll see it's about a minute in the change. So that's pulling the axle out, rolling the wheel forward, taking the chain off, swapping wheels, axle chain back on, axle back in, that kind of thing. So unbelievable, like it's awesome. It's really cool. One thing I will point out, it is a left-hand thread on the axle. The left-hand thread actually threads in the same direction that the wheel travels, therefore you're actually not going to get the axle wanting to undo. So it's kind of a safety, it's going to lock it on. There's no provision anywhere realistically to have it lock wired on. It's not mandatory in Australia to have your axles lock wired, only if there is a provision. But having the fact that it's left-hand thread and the wheel spins in that direction means it's not going to actually back off so long as you put the correct torque on it. One thing I needed to point out was this kit is designed to fit with a Gixxer rim that has the TWF Racing conversion for the G6R 600 5.5 inch rear rim. So there's specific spaces and whatnot that fits in with the Gixxer rim. This axle and everything is designed to work around that. And like I said, less than a minute by hand. The second time that I've done it, fumbling a little bit with the chain, absolutely stoked. Everything is machined perfectly. My only one kind of criticism, I guess you could say, is that there's 4 different Allen keys needed, but I can see why it's smaller bolts, bigger bolts, whatnot. But it was just, once you have everything on the bike, you don't need to worry about that other than your chain adjuster and 24mm socket that's going to go onto your axle. All in all, L74 track and race products, quick change rear wheel kit for an SV650 with a Gixxer rear wheel. Stoked. A lot of money, pretty bling, and I'm pretty happy with it. I'm actually very childishly happy. Ooh, super extreme close.
Yeah,